Okay, well then with that, I want to introduce our speaker, JWirpsa. She has been 25 years as a board certified chaplain in HIV/AIDS work, pediatrics, hospice, and oncology. And I know a lot of you have run into her in the hospital, especially if you're at Prentice, because she spends most of her time at Prentice focusing on the oncology patients there. She also collaborates a lot with Father Bill Moriarty, and she also works with teaching the chaplain interns that are there, which, by the way, David Gordon, if you want to raise your hand, I want to congratulate David because he got into the CPE program, which is the chaplaincy program, over at Northwestern, and just started, what, last week? Yes. Yeah, so that's a really major feat. It's not easy accomplishment to get into a CPE program, so we're really excited for him. So with that, I will turn it over to Jeannie. Thank you. If you want to give her a welcome.
Can you hear me? Is that like a good place to have that enough amplitude? First, let me just say I'm really honored to be with you, and it was great to walk in here tonight and see what felt like old friends, a community, because you are part of our community at Northwestern. I know some of you are at RIC, and I am certain if Beth Reese or one of the chaplains from there were here, they would say the same thing. So thank you for letting me be with you. And let me just start off by saying I so appreciate what you do. We, the regular chaplains at Northwestern, appreciate what you do. And I'll talk a little bit more about why that is, but just know that we want to say thank you, thank you, thank you. Your ministry is invaluable, and we cannot do what you do. So I'm going to talk today a little bit out of my experience as a hospice and oncology chaplain, so really some of the issues that come up that are harder, people with life-threatening illness, new diagnoses, recurrent disease, what do you do when they bring up the big hard questions? I actually think it has much wider appeal or much wider application for wherever you're working. Because I think the bottom line is the question, what do patients really need from us? And the truth is, what they need from all of us, from any minister that walks in their room, is to know that God is present with them on their journey, wherever it may find them and wherever it may lead. An interesting aside, there was a study done recently asking patients what they expected from chaplains and ministers. Whole long list, you know, graph, bar graph, all these things. What do you think was at the top of their list?
Sincerity.
Care. Close. Presence. To make God's presence felt. Second was to feel heard, to be listened to. It wasn't that they needed people to pray with them so much. Maybe that's a way to make God's presence felt. Or that they needed us to cheer them up, or that they needed us to, you know, figure out where they were going when they were released from the hospital, or even bringing the sacraments to them. It was that we, all of us, are here primarily when someone's in the hospital to make God's presence felt through our presence. So I want to talk a little bit, before I go into the challenges that come up with in the end-of-life care with life-threatening illness, about how we do that. Because I think that that is really what makes any interaction we have effective, but especially those when there are hard things coming up. We, the regular chaplains, are often jealous of you guys, believe it or not, because you, in the sacrament of communion, bring God's real presence. Think about it. If you really believe this is God's real presence, as you do, when you walk in the room, you bring that to people, tangible, concrete, right there, right? You also bring the body of Christ, community. Right? People are lonely. They're feeling isolated from their church, from their community. You bring connection with church and tradition. Everything else is up for grabs. They don't know what's going to happen. But for generations upon generations upon generations, and around the world today, in all places, people are receiving the Eucharist. This is happening. So just think again about the solid foundation, the body of Christ, and the sacrament that you bring. And I would just like to say, you are sacrament when you walk in the room. You bring the sacrament, and your visit is sacrament. Truly, it is communion. It is God's presence. And that is enough. I'd like to say it is everything. So I say that because it seems to me that in the face of illness you can't cure, when there are difficult emotions you can't take away, when you don't have the right words to say, we all struggle with that, return to what it is that you are there bringing, the most important thing. Just return to that. And that's why I love this Romero prayer, and I'll just read one line again from the prayer. We cannot do everything, and there is a sense of liberation in realizing that. This enables us to do something and to do it very well. Do that piece very well, and hopefully we'll give you some tips today about how to do the rest a little bit better, feel a little bit more comfortable. But again, come back to what it is that is foundational here, and please do not underestimate the difference it makes to Catholics. So that said, visits obviously entail more than giving the host, right? You walk in a room. So how do we all help convey to patients and families that God is with them on their journey, wherever it may find them and wherever it may go? And I've given you a couple handouts. The first one has Jeannie's tips, as it were. And I'm not gonna go along in order here, but these will come up. I put these together so you'd have something to take home. Oh, what was it she said that I could use to respond to blah, blah, blah? The first thing that I would say is avoid assumptions when you walk into a room. And what I want to say about it is that you don't know when you walk in the room whether the person's a good or a bad Catholic, whatever that means, what communion means or doesn't mean to them. Are they angry at God, or are they feeling close? Are they hopeful about their illness, or did they just get bad news? Are they weary or renewed? Who's family to them? Are those relationships strained or intact? Are they praying for a miracle, or are they ready to die, to be with God? Are they beaten down by pain, or are they excited about their upcoming discharge, getting out of the hospital finally? You have no idea. We have a little more, because sometimes we get paged and they say, can you come, so-and-so just learned that their cancer's back. But you guys, because of HIPAA, I mean, you frankly have no idea, right, when you walk in the room, what you're going to find. So put all assumptions aside when you walk in the room. And I have a little trick that I do, I want to invite you to do. You have to clean your hands outside the room, right? As you do that, pray a little prayer, this one I've given you, or another one. Lord, wash me clean of all my assumptions about who this patient or family is and what they need. Let me see them as your child and make your presence felt in the sacrament of my visit. Again, a ritual of cleaning. So that's about them and what you might think they are, who they are, blah, blah, blah. The next piece, getting rid of your own agenda, is about you. How do you kind of empty yourself of stuff that you are bringing in, assumptions and things that you think you need to accomplish or do, so that you can really be present to where they are when you meet them, because that's what it's all about. It's about them, it's not about us. Northwestern's motto, patients first. It's about them, not about us. So, as you may know, you walk in the room, someone may not even be able to take communion, right? Or they may not want to take communion. And they may not even want you to visit, right? But you go in thinking this is what you're going to do. You got to give that up. It's hopefully what you'll meet in that place. You may have a special prayer, a special devotion to a saint, a relic card. How do you know if that's going to fit where they are at all, if that's meaningful to them? Don't be offended if what it is that you bring in who you are at that moment and the things that you think are important don't fit with who they are. Get rid of your own agenda as you walk in. Ask them, which prayer is helpful to them? Do they have any special intentions? How can you be of service today in addition to bringing communion? Would it be helpful to talk about what's going on? We all, even those of us who've been doing this for many, many years and are trained in this way beyond what you guys get, still bring our own agendas when we walk in the room. And I'll just tell you a quick little story. I work on the stem cell transplant floor, adult stem cells, for those of you worried about embryonic, let's be clear, or double cord, actually, umbilical cord we're doing now. And people at that time often want to have a blessing of their cells, prayers for healing, prayers of thanksgiving. So sometimes I'm running around and I get a request, so-and-so's transplant is at 3, can you please come? So I go in to meet this couple, and I have 10 minutes. I gotta find out who they are, what they believe, what they wanna pray for, you know, all of this really quickly, and explain kind of the process, and that we only have 1 minute when it actually gets time to hang the stem cells. So I'm on a roll. I start asking them a few questions. Both rather elderly folks start filling up with tears. They look very stoic. They're farmers from downstate Illinois. I just keep plowing on with my questions. Stupid, Jeannie, look, right there. They're telling you what they need, which is not the logistics about the stem cell and all the information that you came in wanting to gather. Stop, notice, pay attention. Empty your cup. So that's the image I use for getting rid of my own agenda. Before you walk in the room, empty your cup. Empty your cup of the emotions you bring, the fight you just had with your husband, the thought you have that it's a special day and you've got to make sure that folks, know that St. Peregrine is with them and he's the cancer saint, which isn't to say that you can't use those tools, right? And that all of who you are. But don't assume that there's going to be room for that or that that's what they need until you kind of get a sense of what's happening. That's the only way you're going to hear what they really need, help them feel heard, and frankly, make God's presence felt. Pay attention. You walk in the room. Notice, wide view. What's the mood? What's the environment? What's going on? Are the lights on or off? Are the shades closed or are they open? Is the patient up in bed or are they half asleep? Or maybe they're lying on the bedpan. I've been there. Do they have low energy or are they joyful and chatty, energetic, right? Match where they are. It's okay in this case to be a chameleon. I know that sounds weird, you're supposed to kind of be who you are, but the truth is, and I hear these complaints from patients all the time when doctors walk in and they're all chipper and upbeat, or the chaplain intern comes in and they're nervous and all chatty, and the patient's exhausted and weary and just got bad news, and it's like, who is this person? Do they not have a clue about what's going on? So again, just take your time and just notice. Where are they? What's happening? What do I see? Look for clues. And again, try to meet them where they are, because that is going to then make room for them to start talking to you, telling you what's really going on, being with them in a way that, again, helps them feel deeply, deeply, deeply heard, which I'm going to say over and over again is really what our patients need. So one way that you can do that when you go in, since it's kind of hard to tell, is you can kind of reflect what you observe is going on and then kind of check it out. So something like, you look really tired today. Are you up for a visit? Would you like me to make my visit brief or just sit with you for a while quietly? You seem energetic. Is that because you're nervous or excited and happy? So you notice, you pay it, and then you don't just run with it, because you could be so wrong, right? And maybe they're all like this because they're having a test that's going to give them news and they don't know how else to express it, right? So check it out. Just ask. I mean, these are kind of common communication tips, but I think we forget them when we're in a role and we're going in and we feel like we got this big agenda on us about what we got to do for God and ministry. So again, just pause and really listen, observe, and then reflect back and ask. Listen, really listen. Resist the need to fix things, give advice, and make it better. I don't know how to say this enough, except I'll use an exercise. I'll invite you just for a moment to close your eyes or just think, kind of go internal for a second, and think about a time when you have felt heard, really, really heard. What was it that helped? What did the person do with their body, with their language, with their response to you, with their timing of talking, with their use of silence, with their tears? What did they say that helped you feel heard? Who do you go to? when you really need to vent and feel heard. Flip side is, what kinds of things do others say or do that don't help you feel heard? Okay. For me, open your eyes. What makes me not feel heard is when people automatically start giving me advice or telling me their story of the person that they knew who blah, 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 you know, and then I'm like lost in the picture, right? So especially, and Kelly asked me in particular to talk about when patients are in spiritual or emotional distress, and you walk in on that, they don't need you to start talking about your sister who's got cured from cancer and, you know, this doctor that you know, blah, blah, blah. They need for you to sit and listen to them and talk. And if they have honored you with sharing that, then hold it gently, hold it with lots of respect and care and carefulness, and quiet your voice. We have a little saying we say in chaplaincy is, usually we say, don't just sit there, do something. Well, the opposite is true. Don't do something, just sit there. So if you can get that mantra in your head as you're tempted, because we all want to make things better. We hate to be in the face of people's distress and things that are going on. We want to make them feel better. We want to fix it. That's human nature because we care. But actually in this situation, these kinds of situations, the best way that people can be helped, can feel cared for, is to be deeply heard. When persons are having a hard time, they need to lament, they need to cry out, they need to process, they need to be real with what they're feeling. If that is allowed to happen, then they will move to a different place on their own timing. You can't move them from A to Z. They need to go through A, B, C, and D, and all the things that come with this. And this is where I love the Psalms. How long, Lord, how long must I drench my sickbed in tears? How long must my enemies assail me? Why have you abandoned me? Why have you forsaken me? People cry out. They need to do that. And eventually the refrain is, I'm there for you, I'll set you high upon a rock, don't worry, right? But that's not where it goes for a really long time in a lot of those songs. Those are real people talking to God with all of who they are. So if you're bringing God in, right, and you're somehow representing the big guy or gal or whoever it is, right, then you also need to give them that space to do that. Don't short circuit their process. It's not fair to them. They need to go through it on their own. And I know it's hard. I actually use images sometimes to help me sit and be quiet. And one of the images that I use is Mary at the cross of Jesus. Sitting vigil there for however long that was, right? Watching her son suffer. Staying present. Not leaving, not running away, not being able to take him down, but being there present. So find an image or something that gives you that staying power, right? So you can be there and be present and not jump in and feel like you have to rescue. Please don't be a cheerleader unless the person asks you for that. And sometimes they'll want you to be that, right? You can tell, that's what they really want. So tricks about reflective listening I put on your sheet. And again, it's a way of when you need to respond and engage with the person but not fix it, what can you say? Again, some of you are really good at this already, and for others of us it's more of a struggle because we are doers. We like to make things happen, get it all, solve the problems. What I hear you saying is X, is that you're weary. Is that right? Tell me more about that. Get people talking about what's going on. You have a limited period of time, so you may not be able to do it for long. But if they bring something up, you don't just want to walk out the room or change the subject or try to make them feel better. Give them some time by saying things, we call them chasers. Tell me more. I hear you're suffering. I'm here with you. Do you want to tell me more about what's going on? It's simple things, believe it or not. Instead of saying, it's going to be all right, honey, don't worry, right? Which is our temptation. And of course, I'm sorry that you're suffering, but I'm here for you. I'll continue to hold you in my prayers. I want you to know that God is here with you too. Say things like that. There's a lot of things we can say that help the process continue for people so that they can get these big things out. And of course, just being silent. You know, what do you do when a friend's hurting? Put your arm around him, touch him. You can do that, just sit. I just want to tell you the importance of this, and some of you know this gentleman, a 60-ish African-American man who had a stem cell transplant, who's a Catholic. And he recently asked me if he could have lunch with me, which was such a delight. It was about 6 months since he had his stem cell transplant, and he'd spent about 4 or 5 months in the hospital before that doing treatment, then 2 months for the transplant. And then he had a really rough road after the transplant. It's not always easy for people. He had, again, these cells that weren't his, he was sick, and kidney problems, and this and that. And his whole family needed him to be upbeat and fight and talk about how he was going to be well and he could do this. So he would call me on the phone, even after he got out of the hospital, and tell me the truth about what it was like. Just tell me the truth. This is so hard. I never knew it would be like this. I don't know what I was thinking. Why did I do this? I'm never going to be well. I just want to give up. People can't always tell their family these things, and so they tell strangers like us. But we need to be able to not be like their family and try to just dismiss it. Oh, don't feel that way, don't give up, you'll be okay. He was so grateful, and what he said to me was, you were the only person during this time that I could really talk to about how hard it was. And what it enabled him to do was not give up, but actually to find energy to keep going. And he's now much better, and he's doing great, and he took me out for lunch. So again, to trust that this process happens, and back to the Romero poem, or prayer, that again, it's not all in our hands, but we can start and help wherever we meet people move the process along. Am I connecting with you?
Yes.
No?
Very
good. So closely on the heels of that is don't give theological answers to cries of the spirit. And what I mean by that is this. I'm just going to tell you another story. I love to tell stories. I had a former patient who died, who was a mother of 3 young children, who had leukemia, who had suffered horribly from this disease, gone through horrible treatment, got better, went home, only to recur shortly after that. And the treatment that she had was causing her incredible suffering. I mean, I cannot tell you what her suffering was like. And she was a member of an evangelical church, Willow Creek, way out, very faithful woman, had this really, really just strong faith, always had throughout this whole process. But when she came back in, after she'd recurred, I walked in her room and she said to me, "Jeannie, why does God hate me so much?" What do you say to that? What I was tempted to say was, oh, God is a God of love, he doesn't hate you, right? To go up here and speak theology, instead of hearing her on the level where she was actually talking, which was, this is so incredibly hard, I am suffering so much, I feel like God must be punishing me, he must hate me. And so my response, after I checked myself from saying what I knew I shouldn't say, but believe deeply that God is a God of love, he didn't want her to suffer, he didn't hate her, he was here, oh, Marlene, don't feel that way. But instead of saying all that, I asked her, I think I said something like, oh my goodness, Marlene, my heart just breaks for you to feel that you must be in such anguish. Tell me more about what's going on, right? I didn't tell her about God's love. Now, eventually she got back to God's love. But again, it's about hearing that deep thing. And one of the things that we like to do is spout theology. 2 Catholics, right? You're all Catholics. You go in to see people. Well, you can tell people what the Catholic Church believes or speak theology. But it moves them, as I say, from their heart, which is where in their soul, pain and anguish, to their head, which disconnects them. Suddenly you're up here saying, oh, why do people suffer? The theological thing you're going to go to on suffering, right? What are all these theories and what do people believe? And instead of being with people in that place where they need you to be. So, next, kind of closely on the heels of this, although I think these are ones that we don't notice that we do, but we want to do all the time, is avoid well-intentioned comments and religious platitudes. By that I mean things like this. Don't worry, it's going to be okay. I'm sure it will be okay. It'll get better. You can take it. You're strong. God never gives you anything more than you can bear. It's God's will. It's God's plan. I know He has a plan for this. Everything happens for a reason. Now, all of those have some kernel, hopefully, of truth, and at certain times they might be helpful to people, but often they just don't ring true, and I see people kind of roll their eyes when folks say things like that. How do you know things are going to be okay? Maybe they're not. You know what, and I'm going to die. You know, I'm not strong right now. I'm weak as anything. You know, I don't feel strong. Don't tell me I'm strong. So again, what are other things that we can say instead of those things that, again, we use all the time because we want to fill the air with things that, and we just want to make people feel better. It's not a bad intention behind it. So what could you say instead? In the face of like someone's anxiety, you could say something like, I see you're really worried, right? I don't know what the results will be. That's a lot more honest, isn't it? You're kind of walking with that person. And hopefully you've then brought them something that is helpful to them. I wish I had a crystal ball, but I don't. I don't know what's going to happen. But I'm here with you now. I see your suffering. I'll continue to pray for you. I pray that God gives you strength, maybe rather than you're strong enough to take this, God doesn't give us more than we can bear, right? So there are ways to flip it on its head. And again, that one sheet I gave you hopefully has some of these suggestions in there. I didn't put them all. Let me pause for a minute. I see there's a question back here, and then I'll talk a little bit more. I've already kind of segued into some of the hard things that come up, especially with life-threatening diagnoses or cancer, things like that.
I'm not sure I see the difference in what you're saying is don't say theology. And one thing you said, don't tell them that God loves you, because that's theology. But then on the other hand, you say, tell them that God will be with you. So how is that different?
So what I was saying, in the face of somebody feeling like God hates them and is punishing them, at that moment, telling them that God loves them is not helpful. In another moment, telling them that God is with them might be helpful. But in that moment, I needed to help the person express what they were feeling. They felt abandoned by God. They didn't feel like God loved them. So it's not my job to try to dismiss what they're saying and make them feel better. It's our job in that moment. Hopefully through our presence, we're showing them that God loves them, right? We're showing them that God cares because we're there. But we need to pay attention to the deepest things they're saying and respond there, start there. So you see the difference? It is subtle, you're right, it's hard. If people are feeling abandoned by God, frankly, and I'll talk a little bit about that, I probably wouldn't say God is here with you, right? So it depends on what they're saying. If people are feeling anxious, but not abandoned by God, then you want to say, oh, I see you're worried, but I'm here with you. Somehow I know God will be with you on the journey. So it all depends on what they're bringing to you. Other comments or reflections or quick questions? Are you just waving back there? So for people who have serious illness, and I actually think at the rehab center, at what's that nursing home you guys go to? Warren Bar. I think people have these same things going on. You may not always know it, but we send cancer patients to the rehab center all the time. People have just gotten a diagnosis that they're going to be quadriplegic for the rest of their life. I mean, these are serious things, right? So though I'm mostly going to talk out of the experience of oncology patients and folks with life-threatening illness, just again, see if you can apply this a little bit more broadly. But there's some common spiritual struggles that come up, and I can't talk about them all because we could be here all night. But I want to just mention a few, because I think these are the hard questions that often kind of get put into your face and cause you to go, what do I say? And the first one is that big one, like loss of purpose. Why me, right? Isn't there the breast cancer used to be why me? Because lots of people, when they get a new diagnosis, and often no matter how strong their faith is, suffering leads people to ask, to wonder, why is this happening? What have I done? And is there a bigger reason or purpose to this? Human beings want to make sense of things. I think that's kind of how we stay afloat and order the world a little bit. And so even when there isn't an explanation, people will think and feel like, I must have done something. They start looking back at their past, and it doesn't all add up, but still they question, they cry out, they ask. And this is back to the lament. When people get a new diagnosis or a big diagnosis, of course they're going to say, why me? To wonder why this is happening. It just makes perfect sense. So again, our job, I think, if you hear that big question is not to say, oh, God doesn't send suffering upon people, he doesn't cause illness, or, well, you did smoke all your life, right? And that's why you got lung cancer. I know you wouldn't say that. But is to, again, help them continue to ask the question. So I always normalize it for them. It makes sense that you would ask, why me, right? You're only 23 years old. You've barely begun to live. It seems unjust, unfair. Of course you're mad. Of course you're angry. Oh my goodness, how could you not be? So I try to normalize their feeling. And sometimes I even use things like, I've heard lots of other patients when they receive this kind of news ask the same question. Are you getting any answers? So then that's the second step, is to ask them. Not you tell them why this is happening or what you think or your theology or your answer, but to go back to them. It's about them, not us. Do you have any idea why this is happening? I once had a gang member when I worked in hospice care start asking this question. And I have to say, had I said something to him, nice and polite, like, God isn't causing you to suffer, you didn't do anything to deserve this, I would have missed an opportunity there, because actually he had a big burden he was carrying about things that he'd done that were really wrong, that he was feeling that he was being punished for. And it led to incredible spiritual growth and peace and making amends. So again, people ask these questions sometimes because there is no answer. And you just need to put your hands up and say, oh my heavens, why is this happening? This is shocking, right? I think it's okay in those situations to say something like, I use this all the time. I'm not going to insult you with some easy answer. I don't know why. I don't know why. These are big questions you're asking. But I'm hearing you're in shock, I'm hearing you're upset, and I'm here with you now. Reassure them, that you're there. It seems like not a lot, but frankly, it's helpful. It's probably the most helpful response. I wish I had the answers. I sometimes actually confess to folks that I have a very long list for when I meet God face to face, because there's lots of things on this earth that don't add up. And I know probably when I get there, it'll all make sense to me. At least that's what we're told, right? But I don't get it. Do you get why there's all this suffering and these horrible things happen? And we don't have the God's eye view. So telling people that God has a reason or a plan or a purpose in that moment when they're asking those big questions isn't very helpful. Now, what often happens is when you start getting them talking a little bit about, do you think there's any reason why? They'll go, I don't know why, but boy, my family certainly is coming around a lot more, and my two brothers that never spoke to each other are now talking to each other. Maybe that's part of the purpose here. So people often start discovering their own purpose, their own sense of reason, what this time might be about. The diagnosis brought me back to God, people will tell you. It was a wake-up call. So see what they answer, right? If you ask them, and maybe with time again, they'll start to come to their own sense of purpose and meaning. And believe it or not, having some sense of purpose or meaning in this, why is this happening? It's not just for naught, it's not in vain, actually helps people get through treatment and suffering and a lot. So that's the first big one that comes up a lot. The second one is, and I mentioned this a little bit before, but anger, a sense of anger or injustice or abandonment by God. Some of you know this lovely patient too, who fortunately is quite well right now, but I happened to be called in on the day when she got a really horrible diagnosis of cancer. And she looked at me when I introduced myself as the chaplain, and she said to me, "You can come in, but don't talk to me about Jesus and don't pray." We hit it off from the start. I'm like, okay, what do you need to talk about? I'm seeing you're having a really hard time. Tell me what's going on, right? It's okay that right then she felt mad at God. She was furious. She'd lived a good life. Job, right? Lived a good life, done all the right things, and she gets one of the worst diagnoses. It's horrible. I got to sit and lament with her and cry out and shake my fist and say things like, "You remind me of Job in the Bible. Isn't it great that book's in the Bible because it gives us permission to go, right?" The old Catholic mystic, St. John of the Cross, had a term for this period that people go through when they feel like God's not with them. The dark night of the soul, right? Just wonder where. You're in this valley. God's not there. Hopefully you coming in maybe helps them, but people have to walk through that valley to get up to the other side sometimes. They have to go through their own wrestling with God. So again, normalizing what they're going through, asking them to tell you more. Why are you so angry? Tell me how this is so hard. What feels so unfair about it? And interestingly enough, this is where I was wondering about offering. Do you still offer to give them communion or not? I think I might, and I might offer to pray, but I'd give them an out. I might say something like, you know, I brought communion with me. I'm the minister of care. I certainly would understand right now, given what you've said to me about, you know, kind of feeling like God's not with you, that you might not want to receive. But if you'd like to, I still have it here for you. And see what their response is. The same woman, she wouldn't let me pray with her, but she took communion every time the minister of care came, because that connected her and somehow reminded her. She just kept doing the act, right? Take communion. Somehow it shows you God's with you, even when you're feeling like God's not. So interesting, right? I want to leave time for discussion, so I'm going to make 2 more points here. 2 more spiritual struggle issues. This is the big one, and this is about hope. Christians are a people of hope always. But hope is not always in physical healing, miracles, and life here. Hope also just has many faces and many locations. Where people find hope is not only in the physical healing, though many people who are ill obviously are looking for it there. So when people get a new diagnosis of cancer or horrible heart disease or something like that, or find out they're going to be paralyzed, right? Especially with the big C, generation for the big C, right? Oh, that means I'm going to die. They're going to go there, right? It's not our place in that moment to tell them they're going to be well. We don't know that they're going to be well. They need to be able to look at that fear, right? I think for people who have an initial diagnosis like this or recurrent disease, a sense of despair and hopelessness and shock and even denial is to be expected, right? Don't you think? Like, either you're going to die and it's never going to get better, or, oh, I'm going to be just fine. Either way, right? Hope is a fragile thing. People are trying to hold on. They don't know what to hope for. They're all over the map when they hear news like that. And again, people need to process this. They need to be able to have all of this come up. What's interesting is, so sometimes you'll go into a room, an oncology floor, and people will have just started chemotherapy. It would seem logical that you could say, oh, you know, I so trust this is going to work, you're going to be well. But even then, you don't really know, do you? Is this a last-ditch chemo they're getting? Has the disease recurred? So it's tricky. Again, I would just say to them, what are you hoping for? They just started chemo, probably in order to go through it. They're hoping to be well and maybe find a cure. Sometimes maybe they're just hoping to buy a little good time. So ask, right? Don't assume again, just ask. You hear, oh, they just hung chemo for the first time. I just got a new diagnosis. Oh, that must be hard to hear. Looks like they have a plan. What are you hoping for? You think this is going to work? Rather than just saying, oh, great, I know you're going to be well, or the things that we want to do. During treatment, okay, so at any one time, it's hard to know what people are hoping for, right? Again, more quality time, more time. Some people, believe it or not, their hope lies in it being over. When people really, their illness is not going to go anywhere, and it's just going on and on. I have heard people, and when I was in hospice care, this was very true, praying to die. I just want this to end. What's the point now? I'm just ready. I've done everything I need to do. That's a form of hope, right? So again, I'm trying to give you a sense of hope comes in many forms. So especially the doctors, the oncologists are particularly bad at this. We want to give like this false hope, right? Here's one last chemo, go get a second opinion, do this, do that, because we don't want to let people down. We don't want to take away their hope. But if you can remember, and maybe this is a trick, that hope comes in many forms and faces, and start to explore what that looks like with people, you'll soon discover, again, unless they're in that initial hopeless stage, that there's lots of room for hope. One of the tricks that I use is trying to redirect people. So, okay, so you're hoping for the big miracle, right? You're still holding out for that. While you're waiting for that, since we don't know what God's going to do, I don't know what God's going to do, are there other things you're hoping for right now? And people will come up with things. I'm hoping to live to see a friend of mine, live to see his first great-grandchild be born the end of this month. He knows he's going to die. He's had a horrible disease for a long time, but that's what he's holding on for. What a great hope to have. I get to see my great-grandbaby, right? I hope to be able to get home. I hope to go to Alaska on a fishing trip. I hope to not be in pain, to not suffer anymore. And sometimes I hope that I will go to heaven and be with God. I hope my family's going to be okay. So lots of other kind of objects of hope, we call them, or places where people can put their hope. And again, the trick is to say, oh, I so wish that happens. I so hope you get that miracle. Wouldn't that be incredible? So people say, do you think God's going to give me the miracle? Oh, wouldn't that just be something? Again, I don't have a crystal ball. I don't know what God's going to do. Tell me what your miracle would look like, I sometimes say. Right? Because I don't want to take that away from them. On the other hand, I'm not saying, yes, God performs miracles. I've seen, when I was down in South America, that God sends miracles if you just pray harder, if you just do this, if you just do that. Because I don't know. So it's a tricky kind of way, again, of just inviting people to talk more. And sometimes what happens when people are hoping for a miracle, what I've seen, is that they themselves then start grieving and going, oh, but you know what? I am just so sick. They've tried everything. I really think it's my time. And they start grieving and come to a place of acceptance and peace. Not always. Resist the temptation to share your miracle stories, please. Really, really, it's not all that helpful to people. I know we believe in them, you've seen them, unless they specifically ask you. But sometimes what we do, the person's just finally gotten to a place of acceptance that they're going to die, that this illness is not curable. And then the doctor comes in and offers another clinical trial drug, a last-ditch whatever. Or we come in and say, well, don't give up, pray for a miracle. And it's like they've moved here, and we put them all the way back here, and then they have to go through all this hard work again to get to the place of acceptance. And maybe in the meantime, we've robbed them of the time and the space they need to do spiritual work, to ask for forgiveness, to take care of unfinished business at home with their family, right? So again, just be sensitive to that timing, especially when it's around very serious illness and what people are looking for. I want to mention one last, since we're on the topic of death, and I kind of really wanted to be able to cover that because I know some of you have had the unfortunate experience, not just in Prentice with oncology patients or palliative care patients, but over in Feinberg, of walking into a room and learning that the person was just told that they have several days to live, or that they're going to die, or the family had just learned, and you're like, what do I do now? So I'm going to talk a little bit about that time. If the person is awake and alert, often you may encounter them alone even, and they'll start talking about the fear that they have of dying, or you can see that. I think that people are afraid of a lot of things as they're dying, even if they're super faithful people. And sometimes it has nothing to do with faith pieces. What could they be afraid of? They could be afraid that they're going to suffer, that they're going to suffocate, that they'll be alone, that their family won't be okay, that they can't handle it emotionally. All these people coming to say goodbye and crying all the time, and it's just overwhelming, right? And sometimes they're afraid for their soul. So I think asking if you find people afraid or families afraid. I know people are afraid of a lot of different things as they're facing this time. Can you tell me more about what you're afraid of? Right? Offer to stay with them, obviously, if people seem afraid or agitated. Calming presence, breathing, holding their hand, asking them if it would help to pray or read the Psalms or say the Rosary or something that could be of kind of a comforting nature to them, but asking them if that would help. And if they express salvation concerns, I had a woman the other day just absolutely petrified. She'd lived a horrible life. She's going to go to hell. I mean, she was terrified, terrified. Call us. That's what we're trained to work with. Or call, or ask them. Don't suggest a priest, because I don't know that people always, you need to see a priest, right? That's, again, that advice giving. That's that your theology, what you think they need to ask. Some people, when they're asking these kinds of questions, find it helpful to talk to a member of the clergy or their own priest. Would that be helpful right now? See the difference? Rather than telling them what they should do, you need to go to confession and get the last rites, and all these things that we think they need to do, which maybe they do need to do, and that will bring them great peace. But instead of dictating, ask, would that be helpful? Suggest options. We have chaplains, we have a priest, would that be helpful? And again, you walk in and the person's no longer conscious and the family tells you this news, what would you do? I'm really sorry to hear that. I didn't know. Boy, what a loving group of family you have around here. She's so blessed to have you here with them, with her. Would it be helpful to pray? Would communion be helpful now? Would it be helpful, since they're Catholic, to have a priest come during this time? Has anyone asked you that? Tell me about your loved one. I see he's very loved. Tell me what he was like. Right? Get him talking. The simple things that you do with any friend or family member who you encountered. So I know it throws you off when you first walk in, right? It's like, because you're not expecting it. But again, it's that, okay, step back. What do they need? Help me sense this, Lord. What do they need here? If people ask you about heaven, do you think we're really going to see Aunt Mary when I get over there? What do you think heaven's going to be like? Again, I try to avoid, and I'm going to invite you to avoid giving the rote answers, the answers that we got in our catechism or that we read or that are taught to us, and ask, what do you think it will be like? What do you hope it will be like? I don't know, I've never been there, right? What do we think a lot of things, we're taught a lot of things, but what could it be like? And that again gets people thinking about what they're really going to miss is their family, and so they really are hoping that there's going to be family there for them. So it accomplishes two things at once, and they're able to maybe have some more peace and this image in their head. Another thing, and I'll stop here with this, that I often say to people in the face of these many unknowns is something like, I don't know what it will be like, but what I do know is who our God is. Can you tell me about what you know about our God? And it's fascinating. So instead of the worries about, am I going to well, people don't really worry, am I going to have a robe, am I going to go to hell? But more the questions, like, oh, are we going to, if I was married before, am I going to be with that wife or the second wife or whatever might come up? You know, those people start all these details, and they're just nervous about this unknown thing, right? I often just take them back and I say, there's so many unknowns, but I know who our God is. He's faithful, He's constant, He's been with us throughout our life, He's a God of love, He's a God of life. We come from Him and we return to Him. So something simple like that instead of, again, trying to conjecture and answer. All right, I'm going to stop. Questions, comments, things, maybe other scenarios or times that have come up that you struggle with that you'd like to share a little bit here?
Would you ask prior to communion if they are in a state of grace?
No, never. I heard Kelly say never do that. Right?
You just go ahead.
Isn't it about, again, it's about bringing God's presence. If they feel like they're not in a state of grace and they're a Catholic with a conscience, they might say, you know, I don't want to receive today. Thank you. Can we just have, right? Lord, I'm not worthy to receive you. Right? So I don't even know what that means anymore. I kind of need it more when I'm not in a state of grace, you know? Right? When I'm really struggling and feel like I've let God down. So I think, again, it's about compassion, it's about presence. It's not about these outside things that we bring in to monitor to what we believe, what the Catholic Church teaches per se. That's all embodied in what you're doing, right? The real presence of Christ in the Eucharist, the power of prayer, the importance of community in the body.
Do you use the same approach to the when the patient is sleeping? Could you use the same approach to the family who has just been notified that the patient is going to terminate in some short period of time? Do you use the same approach with the family as you do for the patient?
No, actually, I don't use any same approach every time I walk in the room. I have to be honest, if you haven't figured this out. For me, it's about figuring out what they need. So the families just learned this news. You know, I will sit down with them and ask them, how are you doing? You know, tell me about what's going on. What do you need right now? Oftentimes they don't know what they need.
Well, I mean, that's pretty much what, okay, so you just sit and talk to them.
Yeah. And again, at some point, so maybe you're talking with them more about their grief and this shocking news and they can't believe this. I spent my whole day today in this situation, actually. And eventually I will ask if they, I might even sometimes still say, do you want to pray? Are you still talking to God in the face of this? Is that important to you? Would that be helpful or not? I try to give options to people. Would it be helpful or not? Because I don't want to assume that it will be helpful. Then they might feel bad. No, I don't feel like praying. So just try to be flexible and open and ask kind of more exploratory questions. But just be with them in their grief. Oh my goodness. What was your relationship like? Were you close? Who's this person to you? Sometimes you find out that they're actually relieved the person's dying because, you know, they were kind of a mean son of a gun and you know, they're feeling guilty about feeling that way. So you never know what you're going to come up with. And again, your time is limited. So this is one thing I want to say. You're not chaplains. We are trained, as priests are, to walk with people, to look at the timing of this, to know how to draw upon different aspects of the tradition to help them move when they're in spiritual or emotional distress. This is not your training. So what I want to say is you're there to respond and be compassionate and not short-circuit their process, but you're not there, like the Romero prayer said, to do the whole bit. So also just be aware, don't get in, try not to get in over your head. And one technique you can use is something like, you know, I have to be honest, I have other visits I need to go to. I see you're suffering. I'm glad we've got to spend some time together. I would really like to have our unit chaplain or our priest come by to continue this conversation. They're much better than I am. They've helped lots of patients in this such situation. because you're not trained to do this, right? And you shouldn't feel like you need to start doing something. I think that's when you get in trouble. What you bring is so valuable, frankly, that you need to honor that and focus on that. And then be prepared for some of this other when it comes up, but know how to hand it off. We're your team, we're your resources there. Again, in most of these institutions. Warren Bar, maybe not so easily accessible, but what would they do for Warren Bar? Call here? And, yeah, so call Kelly, she's part of your team there. But again, knowing how to bridge without just making the person feel like they're kind of abandoned there and you haven't heard them. I hear how much you're suffering. Boy, I hear these big questions you're asking. Thank you for sharing this with me. I really feel honored. I'll hold this all in my prayers over the weekend. If you feel like they might not be open to somebody coming or you're not sure who's available, just leave and then go find us and page us, right? Say, this is what I'm finding. I'm wondering if you could check it out.
When a patient is notified that they have a terminal illness, are the chaplains notified immediately to come back to that room? No.
No. So you can imagine how many patients are in our hospitals, like 1,200 or something like that. We are not notified often. And in fact, we fight with patients that we know and have a relationship with. I have a young woman right now who's about to get probably really bad news that her disease is back and spread. I'm begging the residents and the physicians to not go in there without somebody who knows her and cares about her and who she confides in. So unfortunately, no. We are paged to most cardiac arrests, to most deaths. If they're looking at removing life support in the intensive care units, we're paged. But no, so we actually look to other hands and eyes to be able to say, did you know that, oh, I'm not sure if they need anything else, but I just heard, you know. So yeah, just page that main number or leave a note for the chaplain in the anteroom even.
I had two situations that kind of caught me off guard too, where people were dying, and I wasn't quite sure how to deal with it, but I think I did the best I could, and I called Kelly, and Kelly was so gracious and kind. She set up a time to come in, and she listened to me, and we talked about it. So, you know, if you have a situation that you're not sure if you did the right thing, or if you want to know what to say or what to do, you know, Kelly or, you know, like you said, and the chaplain would be more than happy to help you get through it.
Well, so that's the other piece. It's emotionally kind of distressing for you guys if you're in there and you're around all this grief and you weren't expecting it. We have peer consultation groups. We have supervisors we talk to. Talk to somebody, because you can't just carry this all around either, especially if you're hearing this. And once you open your heart to really be present to some of this and don't just want to make it all better, if you're in the face of it, it's a lot, isn't it? So that's what we're here for. And like you said, Kelly, you know, Kelly is a certified chaplain. I don't know if you guys all know that. She's done this work. That's why she's in this role, because she gets it big time. Other pressing things that have come up?
Final comment. Many times when I go and I leave, I feel like I've got more hope and encouragement from the people that have visited. It's just amazing how that impressed me so much.
Well, and even sometimes the people who are dying, like I have a woman we're sending home with hospice this week. I went in to see her because her doctor was all worried about her. She started telling me stories about how she had to give her jewelry away because her husband wouldn't have a clue about who to give it to, and she needed to get home to sit in her chair, and she still had those dresses to kind of figure out what to do with because her husband wouldn't have a clue about what to do with it. She was like so there, so present, so able. I'm like, wow, I hope I'm like that. Yeah, so completely. All right, I know you guys have to go. Thank you for your time, letting me share some of my experiences.